Hello, everyone. How are you doing? I hope you are well. I hope you have an amazing day. I am Dr. Tammy, your success strategist and literacy educator. I help you strategize how to move in the direction of more and prepare for what's next. And you have entered another episode of Connections and Conversations. And today we have a special guest, Miss T. Barnes herself, global lifestyle entrepreneur. And we're going to talk about some things that we're going to go deep. We're going to talk about some things that we really should be thinking about as in light of all that is happening and is happening and what's going on in the world and how we navigate the world. We're going to talk about some of those things as it relates to Black people. So just set that stage and so you know where we are and what we're talking about. So, of course, you can go up in the description and follow her. Make sure you follow her on Instagram. Her handle is above right under her name. Make sure you follow her and make sure that you share this out. So if you are joining us, share, 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 share. Make sure you hit the like button, share, and if you're over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button and make sure that you subscribe. So T Barnes, let me just be full disclosure and be transparent. T Barnes is my cousin. She's my family, more like my sister sometimes, but my best friend, my cousin, and so let me just set that out first. So I'm a little biased, and if you hear that today, suck it up. This is my girl, and we're going to talk about her talk. She did a talk, and so you can go over to her YouTube channel, which is T Barnes Global Lifestyle. You can go to her YouTube and check out the talk if you haven't checked it out or watched it. I know many of her followers have, but if you're one of my OCs, you may not have, and so go over and check it out and hear it in its entirety. Today, we're not going to play it, but we will be talking about it, and we'll be talking about the ideas that she presents in this particular talk. And we're going to talk about the talk, how it came to be, all of that good stuff. So I'm just going to bring her in, and I'm going to allow her to tell a little bit more about herself, because I can go on, and I have pages and pages of bio. We will be here all day. So I'm going to let her tell you and come to you and tell you what she would like you to know. And of course, we'll uncover a lot more as we go through today's show. So without further ado, and y'all make sure you share. Did you share this out? Did you tag somebody? If you don't want to share it onto their page, you don't want to do all that, or to your page, tag them in the comments. Please do that.
Hi, cousin.
How are you? It's so good.
I'm good, Dr. Tammy. How are you?
I am great. I believe this is the first time that I have interviewed you on screen in all of my live streaming. This is my first time interviewing you on screen. Now, y'all, she is on my podcast. And she was one of my first guests and just graced me with her presence on the podcast. And so you can listen to that as well. And you'll see the evolution of her brand, her business, and what she's doing and what we're talking about today if you go to the podcast. But this is the first time on screen.
Yay!
So before we get started, just let the people know who you are. And if you want to address your fans, your followers, your friends, and the family. And the family, you can do that. I'm going to share it out while you're doing it. How about that?
Okay. I am T Barnes. I am the proprietor of T Barnes Global Lifestyle. It is a lifestyle brand that incorporates beauty and fashion and travel. And I create these amazing experiences all over the world. I'm currently the founder of the Black Freedom Colony. And over the course of October through December, we've had almost 80, almost 100 people come through Tulum, Mexico for the Black Freedom Colony. And we are in here in Mexico for now, and then headed on to Morocco, where I will be the general manager of Spy Palace in Hamid, Morocco, with my business partner, Mohammed Spy. And yeah, that's what we're doing over in T Barnes Land. Yeah.
Well, let's talk about T Barnes Landia. I love that you call it that. Y'all,
It's its own little world.
yes. And we're going to talk about that. So, and today we're talking about the talk. The talk is entitled We as Ourselves Will Save Us All. And like I said, it's over on her YouTube channel, T Barnes Global Lifestyle, just like her Instagram handle. That's where how you can find her everywhere. And so go check that out. Let me make sure that I make sure I put up the comments. Hey, I see people rolling in. Hello, everyone. And so let's talk about the talk. How did the talk come to be?
I mean, it's interesting. I had actually applied. Someone had nominated me for a TED Talk here in Tulum, and I said, "Oh, okay." I wrote in, and I told them the truth about what I was going to talk about, and I wrote it out, and that was denied, which I wasn't surprised about. But you know, okay, I was talking about just Black migration into Mexico, the historical relevance of what that means in this moment in time. And I'm sure it was just a little too much for what they had on their agenda. And to my surprise, a few weeks later, I got a message asking if I would be a part of the Princeton Women TED Talk X TEDx Talk series. And I was pleasantly surprised. I mean, they were familiar with my work, and I was like, "You sure? You know what I do? You know what I say, right?" And they told me to be myself. And
I
so,
do.
yeah, and so I wrote it out, and I struggled with it a lot because I just, um, I was watching other TED Talks, particularly by Black speakers, and they were definitely talking around their subject. So even when their subject, it was clearly a talk that they had around the Black experience or whatever in various spaces, but that they were talking about Blackness to white people. And I don't really talk to others about race. It's a very intra-cultural conversation for me. And so in my talk, I put that, I'm often left out of mainstream spaces because I have rules. And one of these rules is I don't talk to white people about race, but I will talk to Black people publicly about liberation because when we save ourselves, we save us all. And so that was how it started. And there was some pushback, pushback on that particular part, which, was really interesting. I think that I thought that that was very mundane, I mean, out of everything else I said, if that's the part you have the problem with, I was like, okay, I could address that. But I mean, it really talks to this idea that like white supremacy has positioned people to believe that they always have to be centered in every single story. And it was difficult for them to accept my talk where I wasn't doing that. But it was important for me to talk about it in that way because it's a shift of the paradigm for me.
So, okay. So, so, so the talk was not accepted, and it did not end up on the TED stage.
Well,
So, okay,
initially.
all
So
right. So
I,
let's
I,
talk about
I sent it in with the changes. I made those slight changes. It was like that and like one other one where I talked about the lack of integrity that I thought the United States had and deposed it as me giving my opinion versus making it a grand statement about the United States. And so I did those things. I turned it in. And it was about a week and a half that they had this written thing. They accepted it. So I went on to shoot. And I even after I shot, I was still like, "Are y'all sure? Did you watch it? Did you listen to it? Did you read it?" And so we were moving forward. And the very day before, they promoted me every day, all throughout the day. And then about 4 o'clock, I got a call saying that uh, the young man who holds the license said that it didn't pass. And yeah, and so they pulled it right before.
and I heard it, I read it before. And, I know you. So therefore I was like, oh, okay, this is like, yeah, it's good. Like, this is awesome. Like, this is Barnes. This is your style. And so it didn't really strike me as anything initially, but then of course, after, our conversations, then it made more sense. And so what I realized is that the very thing that you mentioned in there happened.
Exactly. The white gatekeepers of Black intellectual space, at the end of the day, you have these platforms like a TED where it's seemingly progressive, right? Like there's this supposedly this grand space to really give thought leaders an opportunity to hash out some of these ideas and to make people think deeper about life and figuring out. And the theme of this particular one was rewriting the future. How do you do that? But change language, challenge positioning, decentering whiteness. I mean, these are all of the ways in which you change the future. So again, not surprised, but it was ironic to say the least, because I just did an entire talk around the centering of Black voice and what it means for us to do the work to recenter ourselves.
So I want to talk a little bit about the title. So when we say we as ourselves, so what do you mean by that? I have my own interpretation, of course, but this is your talk and this was the title of it. And so what do you mean by we as ourselves? What does that look like as ourselves? Who are we? Or what do we address as it relates to that? What are some ideas that we should address and pay attention to as it relates to that? Because I know that's a question that we all just need to ask ourselves, but we as ourselves.
I think that, things become normal so quickly that it becomes difficult to even see that something that we're doing is not normal, right? And what the United States asks of Black people is to morph themselves into an identity that lives and exists in their head and imagination. And then also that comforts them, that makes them feel like we're the non-aggressor, that they will be comfortable playing out the role and positioning that they have now forever. And so we walk through the world, Frantz Fanon, this is old scholarship, it's not something that I've come up with, but we walk through the world with this double consciousness, and I would say Black women with a triple consciousness, where you're not only yourself, but then you have a mask that you wear in order to go out into the world to be acceptable and acceptable within white space. And but ourselves, who we are culturally, who we are spiritually, all of these things have been so dramatically stolen from us. And the recovery of those things are so important because once we recover it, we get really solid and rooted. And so we as ourselves, to me, is that recovery, right? That recovery of identity, of self-naming, of self-defining, and the boldness. I mean, even the idea that it's bold, that you would center yourself in your own story is weird to me, right? But we walk through the world doing this all the time, constantly changing ourselves so that we ease into white space in a way that makes them comfortable.
Okay, so y'all, okay, so first of all, let me just be honest. Like, I have questions and I have a flow, but her responses, I'm gonna have to go with it. And so we're probably gonna skip around a little bit. Okay, so let me just be honest about that because she just brought that up, something up that I want to address. And this is how we navigate the world, not as ourselves. And so in your talk, you actually talk about wearing invisible masks and that idea of wearing invisible mask. And I think that that's basically what you hinted on now, but I really would like for you to elaborate on that idea that you mentioned in the talk. We wearing these invisible masks.
I mean, I have a great example because I don't think that this is limited to Black people. I think that this is something that people do all around the world. But, you're in Mexico. I'm in Mexico now with Black Freedom Colony, and we're out eating, and we're like, this food is so bland. Like, what is going on? I'm in Mexico of all places. I'm the queen of the taco. Like, I just need some seasoning, right? And I sit down with some owners, and like we're talking about how, well, the white people can't accept all the seasoning. They can't take it. So they literally, across an entire, like in their country, shifted an entire recipe to fit the palette of what they believe is the dominant space that's providing the resources for their country, right? And that's outside of Blackness. But when you think about all the ways in which people all over the world are shifting themselves and like code switching in order to fit that space, it becomes crazy. I watch my friends have different voices on the phone when they're at work, or, you know, think about the way that you're going to respond to a microaggression so that you don't make that person uncomfortable, even though they just made you extremely uncomfortable. I mean, these are all small things that we put into our everyday regimen just because it's survival. And I'm saying that creates a really interesting dysfunction within ourselves when you have a whole you, and then you have to create a whole nother you in response to whiteness. That is what I mean.
So how do you propose we remove our invisible mask?
Well, I mean, I think you just have to stop, right? And that comes with consequences. And so I always like, as I've been talking about this, I understand that I have a very different sense of privilege in this conversation. And I think all of these generations, like I'm fortunate enough to come from to be the generation after my father has made it, right? That core of feeling responsible for your mother, your brother, your sisters, your family was something put on his shoulders. But because he did that, I don't have a lot of those same burdens. So I've been able to really push at the envelope because I don't have all of these people depending on me to survive, right? I have a kid, but I know what that kind of security means. And so I always start with that because I understand the privilege of my ability to be able to push back at these things. Because I would tell you to take your job and go somewhere with it. But I know that I've been able to develop a business that I'm, work my behind off to make sure that I have other options and other streams of income. And I'm willing to sacrifice and live with less in order to have the freedom, in order to live maskless, in order to be my whole self. So it also comes with a certain level of sacrifice, no matter what your privileges are. And so I start with that. And what was the question? Did I answer that?
I was just asking you, how do you propose we remove our invisible masks
Yes.
Black people are required to wear daily? Because
I
we're going
think
to
that
get
you,
into this other thing.
yeah, I think you got to just stop. I first stopped doing it at all in my social circles. If you're my friend, you're gonna know me, the whole me. And the same things I say in Black space in private is the same thing I'm gonna say to you in public, right? In your face. I'm not going to curb. Yes, I am like this. I am not going to curb my conversation for your comfort, specifically as it relates to race. So I started to change how that worked in my personal sphere first. And then I made decisions, one, to, typically work within Black space in order, and I have customers across the board of race, but those people come to me knowing who I am. And so there's a real freedom in being able to, move as you move, still within the structures of like kindness and courtesy and respect. It doesn't mean that you live in this place where there's no respect for other people and their feelings, but that isn't centered around that comfort and at the expense of truth, or at the expense of my life, or at the expense of me speaking out. I don't do that. And I think that that's a formula and a way to start.
That's good. Okay, so there's two things that I want to talk about here. So I don't know which way to go. But I want to, you mentioned freedom. So let's start there. What is freedom? What is this freedom you speak of?
I mean, I think that freedom, a lot of freedom is safety. When humans feel safe, they feel free, right? And that can mean so many different things and so many different aspects of your life. But particularly for Black people, that feeling of safety is compromised from so many different places. That feeling of safety is compromised from just the police and the type of police brutality that we live with. It's compromised in our neighborhoods where you have people that live with deep-seated racism, and your life can be compromised by that. The feeling of safety of sending your kids to school and praying that teachers aren't, racist or be thinking that they're less than or not challenging them. Our feelings of safety is constantly compromised. And so I think the first part of freedom is that feeling of safety. How do you get to a place to where you are physically, mentally, and spiritually safe? And I think that that's one part of it. I think that the other part of it is being able to walk in the world as who you are, right? Like there's really wonderful things about Blackness and how we move in the world that we stifle in order to fit a corporate setting or in order, to behave in a particular way that we think is only going to be acceptable. And I think once we start to challenge those types of ideas, we'll get closer to freedom. And a lot of it is really just walking in this world, feeling a sense of safety, and being able to be yourself in an expressive way that allows you to move, forward unhindered.
And I really like what you say in your talk. So I'm just going to quote, which is really just a restatement of what she said, what she mentions in the talk. But she says, freedom is defining yourself, naming yourself, living outside imposed ideas of who you can, should, or will be. I just love that. That's kind of one of my favorite lines. And of course, it talks about freedom is an exercise of the imagination, which we're going to get to later. But so when we're talking about freedom, we're talking about who you are and what you are, how you're navigating the world and moving throughout the world. And a big one of those cliche phrases that you hear all the time is, I want a seat at the table. We need a seat at the table. Well, should we be fighting for a seat at the table, T. Barnes?
I
And
mean,
which
I think
table?
yes. I mean, I find that this idea of the seat at the table really interesting because, when I think about it from a liberation perspective and I look at strategies, I look to other cultures, right? And cultures, particularly the United States, is a perfect example of how other cultures come and create their table. Right? They're not begging for a seat at it. They're looking to create it. And so you see examples like Chinatown. You see examples of like, Hispanic communities that come together, live in community, share homes. You see the strategies for how they figure out. And you look at the Asian population, which is 2% of the American voting population. I mean, 2% of them vote, but yet they're not screaming, that they need these things because they're creating them independently in Chinatowns. And I think other Asian communities I've seen work in the same way that I see the Chinese. And I think that these are strategies and ways in which we need to be thinking about, how we move collectively, because what table? Why, how much longer do you beg and you plead and you ask people to see your humanity? How long do you do that before you say, you know what, there's a lot of tables in this world and there's a lot of open space. And to me, it's an energy thing. I think that the US puts Black people into a tailspin and they're constantly spinning their wheels and wasting energy. Where there are tables that are open. There are countries that are saying, hey, bring your expertise, bring, your thought leaders and your investors, and let's do something here. When you have whole countries inviting you for a seat to say that, hey, we can build some things together, you still are going to have to negotiate that. You're still going to have to negotiate your space as African Americans, even on the continent of Africa. But that table is open and willing, and you're not begging, and you're not throwing yourself on the street, and you're not facing these roadblocks that you would face in the United States. And so I'm not necessarily looking for anybody's table. I think you make your own table. But if I was, I would be doing it in nations and with leaders that I'm not having to beg for, just recognizing my humanity, you know.
Ooh, I like that. So you were talking about other countries and working with other countries and building these tables in other places. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what you in the talk you mentioned this idea about borders, and borders between countries are as simple as a simple social construction. And I think that's how it was stated. So I want us to elaborate on that idea and this idea of global citizenship and being a global citizen. So one, I want you to elaborate on what do you mean by the borders between countries are simple or a simple social construction. And so let's start there and then we'll go to the next.
Okay. So, I mean, it's really just simple scholarship. I mean, the reality is that the nation state is a European invention. It's something that they created and then spread across the world, right? Africa was broken up by kinships and tribes or communities of people. And these lines and these borders that we see now between nations were something that was created, during the scramble for Africa. These aren't real, you know? And I think the same thing is true in the Americas and every other place. Like, these are imposed ideas that people even own land. There's so many things that we take for granted as truth. Like, this is just the truth. When in reality, no, they've just been invented, and the same way that you construct them are the same ways you can deconstruct them. And if you think about the nation state and its form and function, it really causes the wars. It causes, whenever human beings are arguing and pushing over land and resources, it's really what causes a lot of disruption, right? It's the source of it. And so I always challenge even the idea of the nation state, even when Black folks are like talking about the nation that they need to build. And I'm like, we actually need to be talking about other ways, more indigenous ways of living together in community. A global world means just that. And now we see it in a global pandemic, like we weren't flying before. So if a pandemic hit one place, it was just in that one place. And those people, now we are all interconnected. So understanding that, it can look different. And the thing is, people always, all you can have to do is imagine it and start pushing the world towards a different way. It's also how they create and keep imbalances and oppression. People are always talking about like this push from the border coming into the US. But yeah, when you go and disrupt people's livelihoods, when you put in major corporations and push out small farmers, and of course they're going to have to migrate into new spaces in order to find work and to sustain themselves. So I think the way that we understand borders as like that's something real has to be challenged.
Yes. Which is why you mentioned it's important for us to recognize ourselves as global citizens. And so I want you to just kind of elaborate or touch on that if you like, about this idea of what that means and how that's connected to what we just mentioned about deconstructing that and really looking at those lines differently.
So, I mean, global citizenship, to me, it is, African Americans are really interestingly positioned, right? Most people don't feel this sense of homelessness that we feel. I think that there's a interesting position when you are a citizen, but also a challenged citizen, right? Like, constantly your rights as your citizenship is challenged in the US, but then, and so you're kind of on the periphery of a nation, but then the core of a nation, because culturally, from a food perspective, from an arts perspective, from just the basic foundations of building, is so deeply African American in that sense. And so I think that because people feel because Black people have this homelessness state, we're in the best position to reimagine what it means to be a global citizen in the world, right? What does it mean when you don't have places that you claim to, or you know, feel like you have a sense of ownership to? What does that feel like? And what can you create beyond this idea? And so I think African Americans are really particularly positioned to rethink it and to say, well, what does it look like for me now to belong? And when I think about belonging, I don't even think about it just from an African perspective. I really feel like I'm a child of the world. And I think it heals some of that sense of homelessness that I do think Black people suffer with, whether it's conscious or unconscious, because I watch it play out when they come to the continent. They're looking for a connection that they may not always get. Um, but for me, the idea of being global, it really gets us to a place to where we start to rebuild our connection to just the base of humanity. We're all in this together and we're all interconnected. And the more you travel, the more you see that, I mean, human beings pretty much do the same thing every day. They get up and eat breakfast with their family. They go out and they work and do whatever they're going to do. They come back and they have lunch. I mean, this is everywhere I've ever been. Everyone does the same thing from a human perspective. And I think the more we become global, and I'm not saying you don't have to give up your American passport. You don't have, this is not coming to America. You don't have to be like, I take, no citizenship anymore. It doesn't have to be that dramatic, but it should be that you're moving and you understand that when opportunities are being hindered in one place, you have the ability as a global citizen to really move anywhere and create realities in places that are less hostile.
And so let's talk about travel. And what is your perspective on travel? I know travel is a big part of your business and your brand. So I do want you to explain that in the context of when you talk about this idea of traveling and global travel within the talk. And what does that look like? And how does that relate to our freedom? Because all of this is going back to the freedom, Black liberation.
The reality for me with travel is that you get to see yourself as yourself. And for me, that means, yeah, like it's when you're engaging outside of what you normally know, where people have their own, you don't even know sometimes that you're living in other people's imposed ideas of who you are, right? And it's kind of like you're acting it out. I see Black people in America act out Blackness for whatever that means, and they do it for a variety of different reasons.
That's a whole
And
nother interview.
oh, it's a whole nother interview, but like there is like this acting out of Blackness for other people. But for me, it just simply means like, what were we talking about? I totally got off track with
Travel,
that.
global
So for,
travel
yeah, so for
and
travel
freedom.
for me, it's your ability to be yourself in a new way because your people are seeing you through new eyes. And so when people see you, like, being a human is an interactive thing. You have to have other people in order to shed these lights on who you are. And what I found is that when I started to travel, people saw things in me that I think the US does so much to hinder and hide and suppress that I was able to grow in these really beautiful ways. And I think travel for that, and for Black people in particular, you don't know what it feels like to live without those daily pressures of racism.
Right.
It's become so normalized in your life. It's just how you deal with it. It's just how you function through the day. But if we're honest, these health issues, the fact that we're more vulnerable during COVID, all of these things are repercussions of that kind of stress. And I want Black people to feel themselves fully, and I think that that's hard to do in the US. And I think outside of it, you're able to build new relationships and to have new experiences and see yourself as a whole person. And things that you think were true may be true in that circumstance, but are absolutely not true in every circumstance. And I think having the ability to say, oh, I kind of like it better in this space and the way that I feel about myself and the things that I'm learning, I like who I am better in this space. And I think travel opens that up for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So, okay. Y'all, if you haven't shared this out, if you haven't invited someone in, if you haven't tagged someone in the comments, please do so. Definitely share this. If you need to inbox them, please inbox. Just to do a real, I know we have so much more to talk about, but I want to just pause and make sure that we reintroduce ourselves real quickly so you know what's going on here. Today, we're talking about um, Miss T. Barnes's talk, We as Ourselves Will Save Us All. And we're talking about the ideas she have in there. And if you watch the talk, you're probably going to see that all that we're talking about is in a different order. Because I'm just kind of going with the conversation because it's connections and conversation. We're having a conversation. But I really want her to explain her ideas and elaborate on them. I think that it is definitely something we need to address and talk about. So that's what we're doing today. And I'm just interviewing her and letting her share her ideas. And I'm loving the comments, and I know she can see your comments. So we're loving the comments and the yes, exactly. And so thank you so much for being here. But make sure that you share this out. And if you're over on YouTube, make sure you subscribe and give the thumbs up on this particular video. So we've talked about global travel, we've talked about freedom, we've talked about all of that. But there's something else that we you kind of hinted on earlier. And I want us to talk about it in more depth because this is one of the reasons the talk is on your YouTube and not another YouTube channel. And that is this idea of the constant state of war that Black people live in the United States. And so I really want you to talk about and elaborate Black people in America living in this constant state of war and what that looks like, what that feels like, and how to navigate that. If there is such a, if you even have an idea or solution for that, but I think you do. I know you.
I mean, that was the part. I was surprised that that was not the part that they wanted me to take out, right?
Right.
Because I think that when someone hears that, and America is very interesting because we live in comfort, right? Our poorest of poor does not even begin to combat the poorest of poor in the world, right? So the average American is living, Black American is living at a certain level of life that's comfortable, right? We have access to things in ways that are pretty comfortable. And I think that, someone saying that we're at war can sound like hyperbole, right? Like it could be like, oh, that sounds crazy. Like, girl, come on. Let me go to
Don't
Walmart and get my
exaggerate.
stuff. Let me go get my things from, whatever, H&M. And because the access to it's a very interesting way to look at a war. But I always tell people, the Cold War, which was a real war with real financial consequences, never had a bomb drop, right? Like, so there was never violence around and during the Cold War, right? But it was a war nonetheless. And when you're living and you're fighting every system every day. And I think that these are the things that are hard for us to conceptualize when we don't know deeply the history of America. When you are literally fighting your housing markets, not even just to be admitted into places to live, but to be able to get loans that aren't, totally, over market value at interest rates that are honestly criminal. Yeah. You have the housing, you have, I mean, every single direction, the prison system, you have the education system. I mean, we're seeing our kids, suspended at alarming rates. And at every direction of your life, you're fighting some space in America, like to exist, to live, to be here as yourself. And I think that the comforts of American society can sometimes make it seem like you're not at war. It's a pacifier. But the reality is, if you have to fight every single direction for your space in a country, you're at war with that country. And not to mention the extreme violence acted out on the Black body in this nation is war worthy, and It's hard for people to conceptualize it as a war, but I think it's important for people to start doing that. And as it relates to what I would suggest, I don't suggest staying in the US at all. But that's my suggestion. I think that there's plenty of places that you can go. I think that there's so many systems. You can keep making your money in America now. You can go back and forth, but like your everyday life, I think can be lived out in much better ways in other places. And that would be my suggestion for it. Yeah, to start looking in other places and other lands. And if you're not, make sure that you and your family have gone to the gun range and that you're a registered gun owner and that you're prepared for the type of hostility that's to come because American white rage comes in cycles in America and we're due.
Mm. Ooh, that's scare tactics. No, that's true. So if you haven't listened to the talk, listen to the talk because I love the imagery that she gives and the symbolism that she gives in there as it relates to this idea of war and the connections with the different aspects of the United States. So definitely check that out. If you haven't listened to the talk, go to T Barnes Global Lifestyle on her YouTube and you can find it there. So your suggestion is that we create it. We create or find spaces where we can live in other places. And so what I know about your work is that is what you're doing right now. You are creating those spaces. So let's talk about two of them. I want to talk about the Black Freedom Colony and what is it? So that those who haven't heard about it can know about it. So what is it and how did it come to be? And then a little bit about how it's turned out. It's been a couple of months. So let us know how it's going. So what is the Black Freedom Colony and how did that come about?
The Black Freedom Colony is currently a group of Black people from all over the United States that were open to a temporary relocation that I organized here in Tulum, Mexico. Most of us are families. We have lots of kids. I've taken over an entire building. So we're all it's one big Black building in Tulum. And we've really started to really consider what community is and how we rebuild it. I've seen people kind of come in a little skeptical. They kind of knew they wanted something different, not necessarily trusting everyone and just trying to get their bearings, to us now being borrowing eggs and people watching each other's kids and all the kids being together and it really having created like a really beautiful family. And where I think we've learned to trust each other again, to communicate better again. And it's been a beautiful experiment. And it came about because I spent all of COVID in Morocco and then came back at the end of June and realized the world still wasn't going to be open when it was time for me to go back to Morocco. And I knew I just could not stay in the US. And it was such a different experience going through COVID in Africa. There's not like that constant, and maybe because I wasn't watching the news, maybe it was going on and it was just something, but I didn't have that constant bombarding of fear. And so Morocco was very strict. So there were rules, you follow the rules. But there was like a piece about the space, I was able to really be creative in that way. And so, yeah, the Black Freedom Colony came out of my inability to sit still in the United States. That's what it was. And I thought it was going to be like 7 people. I was like, there's going to be a few families that may want to go with me and Solana. No. And by the end of the registration period, it was almost 100 people. So we're here in the house.
Yeah. And one thing I know about T Barnes is she cannot sit still. She's always somewhere. And so where to next?
So next, I am now the general manager of Spy Palace in Morocco. And myself and my partner, Mohammed Spy, will be opening a creative community. And that creative community is really to create a space for us to have for retreats and workshops and all different types of things in the middle of the Sahara. I will also be doing 2 cohorts for the Black Freedom Colony there, which I'm very excited about. It's a really beautiful palace and space where I realize people can come and recover, sit still. So one of the interesting things about Mexico has worked. It doesn't come without challenges. It doesn't come with everybody, being, completely happy or satisfied. I think that's an impossible task at this point. But when I look at the full picture of the majority of people that were here, and what we went through to build where we're at now, the challenges that we met with the building and with, electricity and internet and all of the things that you deal with in other countries, we really tackled those things together and came out on the other side, I think, stronger and really clear that we worked through something. And so it's been beautiful. So what I hope is I can take all of these things that I've learned in the Black Freedom Colony and really apply them to this next move in Morocco and creating, this space for artists and thinkers and families that really want to shift to the continent and that want to reconsider what community living can look like. So Morocco's next.
I can't wait. And those of you who are part of my community, we will be going. So stay tuned. If you're not a part of my travel group, make sure you just stay tuned to my platforms because we're going. We're going. I'm excited. So one, she's creating these spaces for us, all of us, to go and experience. And I using that word in particular because it is an experience. And I encourage you to definitely follow her on Instagram, T Barnes Global Lifestyle. And the other thing that we've talked about freedom and freedom as an exercise of the imagination. So not only I think when I look at her talk, I took away a lot, but I think two of the things that I took away as solutions, if I should call it that, or things to really conceptualize and really think about, was not only my place in the world and looking at myself as a global citizen and being a part of the community she's creating, but also this idea of what she mentions at the beginning of her talk about freedom as an exercise of the imagination. And she really talks about and encourages us to imagine. And I know that I follow her. I stalk her. So I'm kind of her, I'm one of her groupies, even though she's blood, like I'm one of her groupies. And she has been really talking about us imagining and reimagining our place in this world as Black people. And so one of the things that is toward the end of her talk, she really talks about this imagining. And 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 when I thought about it initially, when she first started, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, of course, that's what I do in my business all the time. But when I thought about it as it relates to freedom and Blackness and those things, then it looks different, it feels different, it resonates different within me. And so I really want, since some people haven't heard the talk, I want us to talk about this idea of imagining and what does that look like or could look like, or what are some of the things that we should consider as we're imagining and or reimagining our place in this world and freedom.
Yeah, imagining is really one of my biggest code words. It's like my whole theme for life because you have to be able to imagine what it could look like. I think that we spend a lot of time, and liberation, I think, comes in 3 stages. I think the first part is intellectual, because if you don't understand the world and what has happened, you can't understand where you fit into the story. So what I see currently in the political sphere is a lot of people who don't have the education foundation to be able to understand realistically where Black people stand in America. So sometimes they're their conclusions that they come to are not always a completely educated conclusion, right? Because they don't know the full picture. Then the second part of that to me is after you get this is to deconstruct all the ways in which you are living and existing in a space that you're no longer interested in, right? Like you have to deconstruct what has happened and where you fit into it and relearn things. So you could say, hey, actually, no, I'm not going to continue to sit here and accept this. I want this. And so the last part of that is the imagining. Because if you'll sit and like, swim in it if you can't imagine something different. And so, and it's I always tell people like, I get it. There will be people that will never leave the US, right?
Right.
There's plenty of people pushing that, right? I will always be the one telling you to imagine something different. I will always be the one showing you ways and creating ways for you to imagine something different. To me, the imagining is this new stage. We have been literally swimming in this for centuries. And imagining a new way, I think, and we got to challenge all these things. You got to challenge the idea. Integration didn't work, right? Like that's a failed experiment. We have to say, what are the things we've already done? And then we have to be able to imagine what I think that can look like. And so I spend a lot of time in my little land, my little land.
Yeah.
Imagining what it could look like, like I talk to people here in Mexico now, and they're like, I couldn't even picture me like doing some of the things I've done, or like, being with a whole group of people all the time, and like, our kids swimming. There's things that people, and here they are living this out in this really beautiful way, and it changes you. It changes your life forever.
Yeah. And in her talk, she actually mentions several things to imagine, beyond living without racism, but really imagining all the ways that we can, in which life can be more free and then connecting it to freedom. And so, listen, if I haven't said it enough, if you haven't checked it out, go to her YouTube, T Barnes Global Lifestyle over on YouTube and check it out. Check out the original talk. Amazing. So, okay, because I know the hour is growing, is like this time is going. So I want to move to back to the title. So I'm going to put it up. Let me put it up because I want to talk about this title in its entirety. We've talked about we as ourselves and this idea of discovering who you are, uncovering who you are, what that looks like, and this imagining. And so now I want to move to the second part of that title. Will save us all.
Mhm.
And I find each word in the title as its own possible dissertation because as it relates to this idea of freedom, because um, because I think not only this idea of saving and using that word saving, but us and then all. And so I want you to just talk about if we are ourselves, how will we save us all? What does that mean? Like we as ourselves will save us all. And you've chosen this title, and if you've listened to the talk, she mentions it throughout and reminds us of it throughout as she shares all the ideas that we've talked about today: freedom, global citizenship, travel, what it looks like in America, and how we're fighting constantly here, all of that, she reminds us of this. So, could you just talk about what is this? We as ourselves will save us all.
Mhm. I mean, at the core of everything, I'm a humanist. I understand deeply that race is a social construction, and that the same way it was invented is the same way that it'll eventually be useless, right? Or has been useless for some time. And so when you get to the humanity of this, you have to start saying that if Black people recover themselves, they remember who they are, if they start practicing their spiritual basis again, if they are able to um, find the language that they speak at all times, that expresses their best selves. If they center themselves in their story, what happens is you give permission to all of these other people on their little chase to proximity to whiteness, permission to do that too. And because we're in this special place where we've experienced oppression, we've experienced, what institutionalized racism means, we've experienced all of the things that go with that, the kind of traumas and the ongoing, space, we can envision something different. And that's always my hope, is that we, from the perspective of, and I say we Black people, from this perspective of experience that we've had, that we can go out into the world and have different structures. And I'm always challenging people when they travel to not recreate, their colonizers, ways, to really figure out how we might relate to each other differently so that we don't repeat some of the same things that we've seen historically. So that's the one part of it, that the we as ourselves ends up becoming everyone, because ultimately we're all human beings, right? But will save us all is this idea that, Black people at our best, performing with like, when so much of your core is taken apart. Say we're a whole 100% person, we're using 25% of who we really are.
Mm.
And look at what we've done. Look, I mean, honestly, you cannot go through American history and say that Black people, every part of American history, without Black people, this country would be nowhere. And that's with a quarter of who we are, a quarter of it. And so when you recover yourself and you're able to speak in your own voice and you're able to stand in your own power, and you don't shrivel up, behind it, and you don't set your values according to what other people say are important, right? We can recover and create the light for other people to see how we move forward. And we have the ability to do that because we know the consequences of not doing it, so that's really the core of the we will save us all, because I think that the minute we remember who we are, everybody else has permission to remember who they are, and the world would look much less inequitable.
Which now, this was actually a question I had at the beginning, but this is a perfect segue. Much of my platform is looking at your purpose and what you have been designed and designated to do. And so I'm going to ask you, because I think people like to get examples of what you're talking about and how we as ourselves will save us all. So this is perfect. Like I planned it. I didn't, but it's perfect. What is your purpose? What is your mission?
Who, I
Because
mean,
she talks about this in her talk, and I love the way she says it in her talk. So check her out her talk. But what is your purpose? What is your mission?
my mission is to return Black people to themselves, right? And if I can return you to yourself, you can do it all. Like there's nothing more than that, because when you're fully yourself, that purpose and that vision and that drive, it only is exasperated, right? Like it pushes you forward in ways that you can't do when you're not grounded and you're not whole, Um, but it is my personal purpose, I think, is to continue to do this work of freedom, to continue to be an example, to make the sacrifices to show that it can be done, right? To create opportunities for other people to get to it. And really, it's not something that I'm giving, it's something that I'm returning you to. And if I can return you to yourself, you'll get your freedom on your own, because there's no other way to exist when you have all of that. When you remember who you are, you'll have the freedom that you're seeking. And what I hope is that you've done enough of the intellectual work and the deconstruction work to where that something looks very different than what we see now. That whatever it is we're imagining and whatever it is you can build to use and push that purpose along gives us a really beautiful, new type of destination as human beings. And I think that this particular period of time is that transition towards that.
I'm just gonna pause. I just need that to just marinate. That. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for being here. So, is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you want to mention? Anything that you want to share that you're doing? Anything that you want to add to the conversation? I'm going to turn this over to you for you to do that because I know I asked questions, but there is so much that we didn't talk about that was in the talk. But I was really trying to go with the flow of the conversation. So now I'm just going to let it be a free for all. So
No,
is
I
there
mean,
anything that you would like to share or mention before we leave?
well,
Before
I
we
think
end?
that one of the things that I'd like to say about this idea of reclaiming yourself is that the opportunities that come to you from being your whole full self are so grand, and even being pulled from that TED talk was interesting because I had to then do the work to deconstruct why I even wanted it in the first place. Like I knew that there were white gatekeepers. I knew that even in that small shift of like asking me to change and shift and doing it is continuously this bend, right, to fit into the world that's acceptable under white supremacy. And so it was good for me to kind of reevaluate even my desire, and then opportunities for a talk series centering Black thought has presented itself. So, we're busy in the works of putting that together, and we'll be looking for wonderful, amazing, liberating Black speakers, which is different, right? Black thought leaders that work towards liberation. And that's a very specific lane. So everybody is not that, right?
Right.
It's coming out. But what I know is that as I move through the world as myself, the opportunities and the places that I enter, it's just grander than anything I could have ever done had I morphed myself smaller into a box that other people wanted me to fit. And I look at every experience through my life has always been that. Once I was asked to morph and I would leave, whatever this next phase was would be grander than anything that was before it. And so I encourage people to continue to open up yourself to who you really are and to do this work to deconstruct the ways in which this controls our life in a way that is it doesn't allow us to be at ourselves. And I mean, I just hope that, I look at my child and I look at the gift that I was given from my parents, and I hope that this is not even a point of conversation. Like even the idea that she would shift or change or be different, or code switch for anything would be unfathomable for her. Like she wouldn't even understand why that was a necessity. So this work is a continuum, and you do it for yourself, but you do it for the next generation so that they have a more freedom than you had.
Yes. Oh, I probably should just end it there because I know if I say anything else, it's probably gonna. Thank you so much
Thank
for coming onto
you.
my platform and sharing this space with me and your thoughts and ideas and your excellence. Like you're amazing, girl, and
Thank you, cousin. I love you.
I love you. You know, since 15 in Granny's bed, crammed in there. I knew, and I know more that there's so much more to come. And so I just can't wait to see what's next for you and what's next
Yeah,
on that
well,
horizon. Because I
you
agree
need to
that
come to
every
Morocco.
I am. I'll be there.
Mhm.
I
But
already have it on my calendar.
I
So we're gonna
interrupted
do
you.
say that again.
You were saying I agree that something, and then I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. I just agree that whatever's next is going to be bigger because that's what it's been for you. Like every time something happens and you're like, Tammy, and I'm like, girl, just wait. It's about to happen. You're like, well, you always say that, but
It's always
okay.
true.
And so I just know that that's the same thing. And I appreciate your work and what you're doing for people like me, because I'm one of the ones that you talk about who doesn't necessarily have that privilege to do that. I'm trying to, do things for my family, and I'm kind of a generation behind you, so to speak, even though we're in the
Mhm.
same generation, as far as age and according to definition. my work is a little delayed. So thank you for your work and what you're doing and creating space for me to travel globally and hang out with you. Thank you so much. So tell us, let's just remind people what's next and about the creative community so we can make sure that they hop on and when that opens, when the plan for that to reopen and how to connect with you and all that good stuff. So let's just make sure that they know how to connect with you and hop on to the next thing that you're doing.
Yeah. Well, definitely add me at T Barnes Global Lifestyle. You'll keep up with kind of all my shenanigans, my businesses, and my projects. But
And
if
she's
you're
right, it's
interested
shenanigans.
in an alternative way to live, we have Spy Palace opening March 1st. We have a soft opening in February that many of my industry friends will be invited to get the word out, to know that we're out there all beautiful in the Sahara waiting to bring you in with open arms. But if you're interested in joining our creative community through the Black Freedom Colony, excuse me, or individually, let us know. Sorry, Tammy, I'm so dry.
It's okay. I'll take you off. There you go. So make sure you connect with her and Survive Palace. We'll bring her back in a second. But if you haven't shared this broadcast, share it out. Make sure you go over to T Barnes Global Lifestyle, her YouTube page, and check out the original talk and hear it in its entirety. We talked about so much today and just touched on it a little bit. And so I really encourage you to check that out and go listen to it a couple of times. There's her IG handle, and so make sure that you follow her on Instagram. You will see her shenanigans. She's right. And which I enjoy. I enjoy. So to definitely thank you. And the title is, if you're looking forward, We as Ourselves Will Save Us All. So any final words?
No, but we have so much work to do, and
Yes.
I'm excited for what's to come. I'm excited for people's awakening and this new phase of life that COVID has been a blessing in some ways to get us to.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you. I love you.
Bye,
And
Tammy.
let me put up her IG handle one more time before I completely end this. And make sure you follow her. And we will see you soon for another episode of Connections and Conversations. And I hope that if you have any comments, put them in the chat below. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat below. We will be monitoring the chat and going back. We see many of your comments and your hand raises that you are with us here. So we really thank you for their comments and your support. We really appreciate you. Y'all take care. Y'all have a great day and make sure you follow T Barnes. We'll see you soon. Bye.